Hi, here we are at this. We're doing a video demonstration of the ideas we talked about kind of in the written lecture on a shaders breakdown for 3D studio or 3D software packages of all kind. In the written lecture, we kind of talked about the science behind things and general things that can be used throughout all kinds of 3D software. So to go along with this, since the software we're using for this course is 3D Studio Max from Autodesk, I thought we'd go about how this stuff is simulated within the software to be kind of a companion to that original written lecture. Here we've got what a shader is, right? Where we've got a 3D model of any sort, the actual polygons that create our virtual object. And then the shader would be the final paint for that object where we can add things like details and color and shininess, reflections, and all that great stuff. The textures would be all of these separate informational images that will go into this shader, which is a nice big pot of information, then that it gets painted onto the model and looks really kind of beautifully nice, like something else entirely than flat polygons. So what we've got here is an empty, open, brand new 3D Studio file where we're going to be taking a look at creating an object and texturing it using these ideas of our shader. Let me just kind of hide my taskbar here real quick there. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to open up our material editor. If you hit M on your keyboards, that's the shortcut for it. Also, you can find your material editor up here on the main toolbar. This guy looks like a sphere with a checkerboard kind of pattern on it representing our textures, and then a dialog box in front of it. Clicking and holding again can give you either the compact or the slate. We're going to use the compact material editor today, which kind of puts everything into that nice list format, and I'm hoping that kind of ties this to the written lecture document that you should have probably already gone through before you got to this video. Right now we've got one good empty texture slot here that we're going to take a look at using. All these spheres are kind of empty texture slots. So we'll click on this one up here just to use it. Again, if you open up your material editor and it looks more like the slate editor here with our nice flowchart views and all this extra kind of bits of complicated information, you can always get back to the compact mode by coming up to the modes menu and selecting compact material editor. Right off the bat, hopefully from that written lecture you recognize some of these words here that we've talked about. Diffuse, specular, glossiness, self-illumination, opacity, all this great stuff that we talked about, and how light works and how light functions and reflection functions in that lecture is already incorporated into our 3D software package. The other rollout we're going to take a look at here, and what I mean by rollout are these little headlines here that we can open up with all kinds of settings and fun buttons to push. It will be the maps rollout here. So if we click that little plus sign here on the side, we'll get an enlarged view of our maps rollout, which is nothing more than a list of all of these great terms that we can do, all of these separate channels where we can put an image into to create our final shader, which is what we see up here in our sample slot. You'll recognize right off the bat diffuse, specular color and level. We showed it in that written lecture a little bit. Self-illumination, opacity, bump, and displacement, reflection, refraction. We've got a few extras that we didn't really get into quite yet there. But all of these ideas are represented in this 3D package, as well as others like Maya, etc. We'll go back and forth between our basic parameters and our maps here a little bit today, because the basic parameters gives us some extra information that we can change around and manipulate to get the right result. We use the example of a red teapot in the written lecture, so I'm going to go ahead and over on my Create tab here, under Geometry and that Standard Primitives, it should default you to this view. As a matter of fact, we've got a teapot button, and I'm going to use that to create our teapot real quick here. Real quick, I'm going to change that radius to 30 and just get segments of 12, and really that doesn't matter. Create your own teapot, it doesn't really matter at all. I just want one that looks a little smooth and pretty nice for this little video demonstration. It will assign a random color to this thing, not to be mistaken for a texture, a shader, or a material. The random colors that 3D Studio assigns are for other things, like if we go up to our edit menu, we can select things by the color that they're designated. So one idea is you've got a broken mirror with a million pieces of glass all over the place, and you want to be able to select these pieces of glass in order to change their textures or change something on their textures to make them look like a mirror. You can select all those pieces by color as long as they're all assigned that original color here. That original color shows up a little color swatch right next to it once you've selected the item. And on our Create tab, it shows up a little bit down here. You can click on that and change the color only to a few different kinds. You can open up your color wheel and kind of select any color of the rainbow. But this is not to be confused with, again, I said that texture. On your Modify tab, it's up here at the top. So what we've got here is, it defaulted me with a green teapot, but we're going to assign this first texture slot to this teapot. There's a couple of ways we can do that. Click, drag, and drop. The other way we can do that is by selecting the teapot and selecting this texture slot that we want to assign to it and using this Assign Material to Selection button that I'm hovering over currently. Click that, your teapot should change from green to gray. If you select your teapot, notice that the color that it was randomly assigned is still there. So that's how that's kind of useful later on, and we'll probably use it some more later as we get going. So now we've got ourselves a gray default 3D Studio gray textured teapot. In our document or our written lecture, we talked about how we see the color red, and we had two different types of reflection in this world that our eyes perceive and how we kind of see objects. The first one was diffuse reflection, and diffuse reflection is where a light source enters the surface of an object, in this case our teapot, and is reflected out at all different angles, every which way that you can possibly think. And that is how we perceive the overall shape and colors of objects. So, likewise, in our 3D package here, we've got the diffuse channel slot where we can change either color or add some bit of extra information, like perhaps patterns and multiple colors and stuff like that to an actual channel in here. So if we want to see our teapot as red, just like how we learned our eyes perceive color and color of entire objects, then we change the color channel swatch here to that color by clicking on that color swatch and adjusting it using this little color wheel, color selector menu. Find a little red color here and say OK. And our teapot becomes red. Our virtual software then simulating that diffuse reflection idea that physics has given us, thank you science, all over, and we see red all over our teapot. The second color, or sorry, not color, but reflection type that we talked about in that lecture was specular reflection. And that is when the light from a light source enters the surface of an object and is reflected exactly at the same angle right back out from the surface of that object in the same location. This gives us our true reflection. Our diffuse reflection gives us the overall image, the color and the shape of an object, whereas specular reflection gives us the true reflection, things like a mirror. When you look into a mirror, that light and color is reflected directly back at you, which is how you see yourself in that mirror, your own face, your own colors, the color of the room, etc., everything around you. So in terms of light, this would be the reflection of the actual light source. So say you see a small white glare on our shiny red teapot. That white glare is the reflection of the light source itself, be it the sunshine or a light bulb or anything else that's illuminating this so that we can see it in the first place. Which gets us to the two locations in our material editor here that deal with specular reflection. We've got one slot for specular color, and we see it right underneath our diffuse color swatch there, where we can adjust what color is reflected out of our surface. We've also got down here in the maps rollout, right, for diffuse and specular, two slots for specular color and one for specular level. Let's talk about it up here in the basic parameters first. It's got its own color swatch. If we want white light Pretend we've got a white light source here on our teapot, and that's the color we want that to be reflected out of, because we're making a a certain material here that reflects the color white and not a tint or shade of it, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Then we'll select that color white there and say OK. You'll notice nothing is changed on our teapot at all because it comes paired with a companion, and that's the specular level. If the level is set to 0, then we've got no specular reflections, right? It's a very matte colored surface. As we increase specular level, it becomes a shinier surface. So I'm going to increase the level here to, let's go up all the way to about 120, and you'll see something happen to our teapot here in the viewport. Whereas it's no longer a flat matte red, we've added serious white hotspots or highlights to this object, and that white area that you're seeing on the teapot is being reflected and simulated just as a specular reflection would in our scientific kind of explanation of things. Underneath it, we've also got, that works with our specular level, this glossiness number. And depending on the glossiness of a surface, the specular highlight may be either toned down, shrunk, brought in, or right now, like it is at glossiness of a very low glossiness, we've got a whole lot of specular reflections. It's kind of all over the place. So it gives it kind of a sheen to the object. Whereas if we raise this glossiness number to quite a bit, let's say we'll go with like a 90 here, and you can see that the reflection of our light source, in this case this nice little white tiny speck of highlight, is almost a true reflection of that light. So the higher the glossiness is, the more shiny an object looks. Without specular of any kind, again, it makes no difference because they're tied to those numbers. So here we go, right? This is our reflection of our light. You know, we've got a light source up here, a little white light, and that's all it sees. So any of those white highlights on this teapot would be because of our specular reflection. That being said, right, we see this teapot now. It's red, it's shiny, and it's got both specular reflections and diffuse reflections. This is when we kind of bring in and start talking about our dielectric and conductive material types. The chemical makeup of objects suggests two different kinds, and in our lecture we broke them down to these two different kinds being dielectric and conductive. Conductive materials are all the metal or metallic looking surfaces, and dielectric materials were all our non-metallic surfaces like plastic, wood, rubber, clay, fabric, etc. The differences between these two types of materials, as far as our 3D program is concerned, would be whether or not those specular reflections are true to the color of the light or are tinted by the color of our object. This is where our specular color swatch kind of comes in. If we wanted to make this teapot kind of a truly metallic or conductive material, right now it's very dielectric, where those reflections are exactly the same color as the light itself. If we wanted to make this look a little bit more metallic, we may add a red tint to that specular highlight right as it gets a little bit more reddish color. Can't make it the same red, or otherwise it'll disappear, right? But we can get quite a bit more of that tinted idea, which will make our materials look a little bit more metallic rather than painted or plastic or ceramic, etc. We had a few examples in our document of metals and woods and things like that, of that nature, that we talked about, that we used to demonstrate this. Let me bring up real quick the idea we've got of a dielectric material. And right, we have our diffuse color, which is a picture of wood in this case, or a wooden parquet floor almost. And we have these two things that we mentioned that may not have meant too much to you in the lecture itself, for specular color and specular level to get an honest result out of this. The first being the diffuse color, which is this wood, which is kind of an orangish, brownish color. And then added to it would be our specular color and level. And this is how 3D Studio kind of works or is based on. If we want true dielectric materials, we have to use the inverse of the diffuse color to kind of get that, that idea behind it of true neutrality in color, whereas everything is reflected back to the viewer except that color of orange in this case, which tends to look a lot more like white. We can simulate it, we can fake it by just changing our color swatch to white, but that's not the true way that it all works, right? And then let's take a look here. Let's see if we can't actually add those things to this and make ourselves a wood dielectric teapot in this case. Our diffuse color slot here, we're going to go ahead and click that channel button. Our material map browser will open up. And in order to add an image, in this case our picture of a wood parquet floor, to the 3D object, we have to use the standard bitmap setting. In 3D Studio's mind, bitmap is the same as image, any kind of image type, whether it be JPEG, PNG, Targa, TIFF, etc., all added via the bitmap standard map menu. So go ahead and select bitmap there and we'll open this up. I have the images here, you guys won't, but I do, for our demonstration. Just let me find them. I'm navigating them to them through this browser here real quick. And let me find them. They should be down here at the bottom, right? Wood floor is what I use for our diffuse color. So if we put that in the diffuse channel slot, you'll notice that our flooring has changed here a bit because I've added an image to the diffuse. It's no longer paying attention to just that color swatch. It'll take you into the bitmap settings. We don't need to make any changes here at all. We're just going to go ahead and hit that go to parent button to back out to the top there, where you'll see wood floor diffuse color .jpeg now in place of that none button that we saw there, that channel button. You'll also find an M up here in the tinier version of our channel button, letting you know there is something in there, which is why we're no longer seeing red. However, in our viewport, you will see the color red until we turn it on or allow it to view textures and pictures and stuff like that on our teapot. So if we hit this little button up here, it says Show Shaded Material in Viewport, kind of the fourth one in of the little tiny buttons running across the bottom of our display here. Click that to turn it on, and our teapot will immediately suddenly turn to a woodish image here. Right now, our floor is awfully shiny. We want to truly talk about dielectric materials. So what I'm going to do is return that specular level to 0 here real quick. Not to 0. We're going to go a little bit lower than that. Let's try 50 with lower glossiness. We'll go half, 25 for right now, just to get a good idea of how this is going to work. This is a dielectric material, so white we can put in our color specular swatch here will work okay for us. If we do kind of a render here real quick, we'll see our teapot with a very white reflection. The only thing that is this isn't true to physics. It's not true to science, which most of the time us artists aren't worried about because we're true to image. As long as it looks good, we're all right, right? But since we're talking science today, let's go ahead and make sure that we're doing it right. In this case, we would need the exact opposite in order to turn this specular reflection into true neutrality, and that's where our specular color kind of comes in here. In Photoshop or a program of that nature, we'd make our adjustments to come up with an image that is the exact opposite of our orangey colored floor. Thus meaning that our reflections in our specular highlights are going to reflect every color in the spectrum except that opposite of those oranges that we see that makes up our wood flooring. So in this specular color swatch, again, this little tiny button up here and this large none button down here in the maps roll out are the exact same thing. We can go either one. Just because I did this one the first time, we'll come up here and use this little tiny guy next to our specular color swatch. Click it. Once again, select bitmap, and I'm going to find that wood floor specular color map that I created using Photoshop or the like, and say open there. what it does is put that image into the specular map itself. And we get this thing that's actually more of a specular hue of blue. So this lets you know that it doesn't kind of function quite the exact same way there as true color reflection does, right? So the higher our specular goes, the more of that blue that we're going to see in it, which is not exactly right. So we probably are actually, as far as simulation, right, as long as it looks good, will be good. Let me do a quick, right, see, we don't want that blue reflection there. So what we would like is maybe a grayscale of sorts, whereas some of them can be shiny white and some of them not so much. But for right now, actually, we're just going to take that out of there. Right-click and clear. So our 3D software works a little bit differently right off the bat than actual vision and light and color does in the real world. And there are some other shaders and some other things that will actually make use of that idea to get a more realistic look. But today we're going to fake it a little bit by just leaving that color white in that specular highlight there. Specular level, however, is a whole other story. A wood grain floor like this would have areas where we see more specular reflections, where it looks shinier, where it's smoother, and where in other areas we get more of that matte reflection. So the specular level works off of a grayscale image, which we saw in that other image that I was showing you just a moment ago. Right? This would be our level map. Whereas anywhere time where the wood is a little bit rougher or something like that, we wouldn't get that nice sheen that our specular reflection kind of demonstrates. If we go ahead in here to the specular level map, select bitmap again from our menu here, and find this grayscale image that I've used for my specular level, something is going to happen, at least up here in our standard display slot, our sample slot, where the wood looks much more realistic now, right? It's still shining that white color as a specular highlight, but it's dulled or increased in specific areas based on this grayscale image. Dig in here, I'm going to hit the view image button just so we can see this grayscale image. And what 3D Studio is doing for us is anywhere there's a lighter shade, white or light gray, exponentially it will increase the amount of that specular reflection. Anywhere there's black, it's eradicating that specular reflection. Dark gray will be very muted, and this gives us a more realistic look because we've got different textured reflective surfaces all in one for things like masonry, bricks, wood, and anything that's got any sort of a texture to it whatsoever. This specular level really helps us out quite a bit. Hit that Go to Parent button again to back out of it. Our teapot in our viewport, however, is still looking awfully shiny. If we want our viewport to simulate this, we've got to do another step here. We've got to go up to our Views menu. We've got to come down to our Viewport Lighting and Shadows menu. Sorry, one more up. Show Materials in Viewport As menu. And we need to select Realistic Materials with Maps. Once done, our teapot will behave just like it's supposed to, and how it does in our sample slot there. So there's how we're going to, a very basic idea, very simple beginner method of showing a good method of a dielectric material, right? Whatever color your light source is the color that's going to be reflected out as that specular highlight. So in this case, a white light or something like, let's say you've got a warmer colored light bulb that's a little bit golden on that side. We can kind of make a little peaches hue or a yellow hue to it to kind of make it more realistic to fit your lighting and your scenes and stuff like that. Whatever color light you're using when you create your lights here in the future as well. And we can use this color swatch to adjust it from white displaying true neutral on up. That covers dielectric, a version of a dielectric material. What about metal? And we used the example in our tutorial about metal, which was a kind of a rusted metal because we got to have something with a little bit of character as we talk about this stuff. Whereas the specular color or the specular highlight has to be tinted by the color of the object. And so if we've got a rusted metallic looking material here, the specular highlights need to be rusty colored as well. So let's select our sample slot to the next of our dielectric one that we just created, and we're going to assign that to our teapot this time. And let's talk about conductive materials. These are all the materials that are metallic, things that conduct electricity. That makes perfect sense to scientists. We're artists, however, so we're going to do something a little bit different. It means if our diffuse color of our object is, say, green this time, then the specular highlight has to be tinted by that same color green. In this case, I'll usually kind of right-click on that diffuse color, which brings up a little menu for copy and paste. I'll copy it, and then I'll paste it down into that specular color. Now, if it's the exact same color green, and I raise that specularity level, give it a 120 again, just like we did before, and then we'll give our glossiness about, let's go to 60 maybe this time, so we get a little bit more of that. Then we have a true fully conductive material here, where our specular highlight is very green. It's no longer bright white. It's part of this teapot, and you can already kind of see that this looks a little bit more as though this teapot's made out of aluminum rather than what we had done originally, which looked almost like painted ceramic. So that metallic idea is already very visible in here. So our diffuse color would be the actual image of rusted metal in this case. I'll click on the diffuse channel button, select bitmap, and find my image that I used of a rusty metal. Our rusty metal, we don't need to make any changes in the bitmap, so we're just going to back out of it, and it should appear on our teapot, that picture of rusted metal. Our picture of rusted metal isn't enough by itself here. In fact, it doesn't look like rusted metal at all. It looks like a textured orange teapot, right? A very glossy one with our current specular levels and glossiness levels. So we really need the help of those specular level and that specular color here quite a bit, quite a lot. In our specular color channel, let's go ahead and click that and select a bitmap again. In order to simulate dielectric materials, we absolutely must have an image, which is usually, almost always, a lighter tinted version of our original image, something that's a little bit brighter. And in this case, I have made via Photoshop one that is kind of a lighter color of that orange, where I just brightened up the original texture, and each different location where the rust has either eaten all the way away or a little bit less of the way is a little bit different shade of that original rusty orange color. So if we load this in here, our specular color is beginning to change based on where on that teapot, right? And now we've got some lighter oranges, some darker oranges in that specular reflection, and it's already starting to look a little bit more like metal. You'll notice that up here in our basic parameters, our specular level, we were earlier just kind of adjusting the numbers, which gives us a very solid, shiny surface. That's our specular level, where we can add in that grayscale image we were talking about before as well. So in that slot, we're going to go ahead and add that bitmap, and I've got a black and white version, or a grayscale version. Just open it up real quick here. I'll preview it for you. Where I want, anywhere where it's truly eaten away already by rust, I want it to be dull. And anywhere where there's some of that shiny metal still shining through, I want it to be shiny. So anywhere, again, where that light color or that white, that lighter shade, white, light gray, etc., appears, we'll have steadily more shiny. So white is going to be completely shiny, whereas light gray is a little bit less shiny. Dark gray is a lot less shiny, and black is no shiny at all. We'll go ahead and add that in there. Give our viewport a moment to update. And now, suddenly, with just these three images, right, we've got some places where there's still some seriously shiny pieces to that metal kind of showing through in those lighter colored areas. And then when we get into these darker, rusty color areas that have been eaten away by this rust, we've got no shine whatsoever. But our metallic teapot starts to look a lot better. Let's raise our specular, and then we can play with those levels of specularity and glossiness. If we want this to be, truly metal, maybe we raise our specular a lot and our glossiness down more. And we start to see that this really does look like a rusted metal teapot now. So hopefully that gives you an idea about diffuse and specular reflection and how it works and how it helps function on these standard shaders, these simple standard shaders in 3D Studio Max. And we'll go on from there. Which brings us now to the final ideas in that document or that written lecture. Some of these other channel slots above and beyond that diffuse and specular reflection. We've got some other controls here where we can put texture maps to really help sell an illusion here that is our 3D models can change the surface and make things visible or cast light and all that good stuff. One of the next ones I'll talk about, I'm just going to go over to the third texture slot here. So we've got our dielectric, our conductive. Let's just move on and with this extra gray here. I'm going to assign that third texture slot to our teapot so it doesn't look rusty anymore, but it looks flat gray again. And we're going to talk about opacity here real fast. When something is 100% opaque, you cannot see through it. It is completely solid. And then as something gets more and more transparent, you can either start to see through it. 50% opacity would give us a semi-transparent, ghostly looking teapot, whereas 0% opacity would mean that teapot disappears completely. This simple slider here in 3D Studio does the job for making something kind of go from visible to invisible. But a lot of times where we're going to need a texture, something that might come up grate or light fixtures that you can see through, mesh, wire nets, something like that we could come up with a texture for that we can slap onto a surface that will also allow you to see through certain pieces of that object itself. So it's also got a channel button here in our maps rollout. It's also got an opacity channel as well. Our none button shows up there. I'm going to go ahead and click on this and add in an example opacity map, and we'll talk about what that does. Again, this works off of a grayscale. I'm going to add in a bitmap, and I'm going to add in an opacity of just kind of a grate with a bunch of circular holes in it at this point. I don't need to make any changes to the bitmap itself, so I'm just going to hit that Go to Parent button to back out. And you'll notice that your texture sample slot has changed, but your teapot has not. And that's because, again, we have to turn on the Show Shaded Material in Viewport by hitting this, this button that looks like a checkerboard with a light over top of it, or a light bulb. Once we turn that on, certain areas, anywhere where we had the color black in that image, just open up that image again, will be entirely transparent. Black is invisible, whereas white will be entirely opaque. Black invisible, white completely visible. Anything in the gray area, dark gray will be mostly transparent, whereas light gray will be only slightly transparent. And completely middle tone gray will be 50-50. But you can start to see how we can simulate and see through. And now we've got kind of a wiffle ball teapot here that's got a bunch of holes in it, and we can look through them and see the backside of the teapot and all kinds of fun things that we can use textures to simulate without having to use that extra high poly detail, nor have that headache of actually modeling out all of these little tiny holes that may appear in a floor grating or something of that nature. Other things we'll use opacity maps for an awful lot would be rather than model out every leaf for a tree for a video game or something along those lines, we'll use an opacity map to cut a leaf out and just put it on a singular rectangle plane, something of that nature, which we'll probably do later on in this course. So there's how our opacity channel works. It's a little bit quicker to go through here. Next, I want to select a brand new texture slot again and kind of assign that texture slot to this teapot. And I want to talk to you about some other things. Bump. And in 3D Studio, that's how we give something a textured surface that may be more raised or lowered and bumpy in this case than our smooth teapot currently has. So far, again, we've gone over dielectric, conductive materials, and opacity channels. This one, when we open up our maps rollout, it does not appear in our blend basic parameters because it's a little bit more simpler and it has to be done with an image type. Let's open up our maps rollout again here, and bump has its own channel down here. It's going to be the only one that has an amount defaulted at 30, a little bit lower than the rest of them. But all we've got to deal with here with bump is a map slot. Now there are two kinds of bump maps, one that was developed a little longer ago and one that's become a lot more popular, especially in games, because it redirects light in specific locations. I'm going to talk about the generic good old regular bump map first. It works off of, again, that grayscale idea, whereas white is going to be projected out towards you, making the object more bumpy. Black is going to recede away from you, and 50% gray is going to make everything nice and flat, along with all those shades in between, darker being receding and lighter being projecting. So I'm going to add a map to this teapot. I'm going to click on that None button. I'm going to go to Bitmap, and I'm going to find myself a bump map. And I think in this case, we'll use that same kind of let's use the bullet hole idea. If I add that bump map here to my teapot, and I don't need to make any changes to the actual image itself, so I'll hit that Go To Parent here, and then I'll crank up the strength of said bump here. Again, if we look on our sample slot, we'll start to see the illusion of some divots and some dents in the surface of our teapot. Again, if we want to see them on our teapot, we've got to go back up to that Views menu, Show Materials in Viewport As, and Realistic with Maps, and it'll try that same idea. It'll kind of try and show you those bumps. The one thing about bump, the grayscale version of bump, or a regular typical bump map, is that it makes the surface appear bumpy, but it doesn't control the light or which direction. You'll notice that no matter how I turn this teapot or whatnot, the light and shadow are kind of all in the same location, and it gives us a nice illusion of bumpiness, but we lose quite a bit of detail in this version, in this method. The higher we make that bump, the more visible those details will be, right? And another thing about bump is that it's just an illusion. It doesn't actually change the surface of our teapot, which remains perfectly flat in the contour when you get these bumps to their edges. It's just an illusion alone, albeit a pretty good one. And our traditional bump maps are still used quite a bit, especially in combination with that normals bump idea. Real quick here, I'm going to right-click and clear this normal bump map out, our standard bump map, and I want to add in something that 3D Studio will use in order to help us use these things called normals maps. And we've got a normals map here. Let me find it for you here. And for the bullet holes, our normals map is going to look something like this, whereas our bump map was just flat grayscale, black and white. Anything that's dark recedes, anything that's lighter lighter gray here stays flat, white would project or go forward. A normals map is an entirely different beast here, whereas this nice flat purple color is where we're going to remain flat, and all these other colors of the spectrum are going to help us fire off light in different directions. Meaning, if I move the light source in my scene, it's going to cast a shadow that simulates the illusion of an actual deformation on this teapot. So, you know, all these different colors shoots light off in various directions, meaning that it can be a little bit more interactive than our standard bump can be, giving us the ability to simulate true detail rather than just bumps. So let's close these images down and let's see what normals can do for us. In order to use normals, since it came along a little while later after 3D Studio began, where we had our bump channel, we've got to add a specific procedural map in here first. So we're going to click that None channel button here, and instead of going straight to bitmap, we got to come down on our list and find that normal bump idea here. We're going to add that normal bump in here first. It becomes kind of a stack, and we got to back out a couple of times. But we get some new settings here. One for the normals map, and we've got one for actually an additional bump map here So work together, they can kind of create a pretty decent idea. If we go ahead and click on that None Channel button now we can go to Bitmap and find one of those cool purpley rainbow colored images. In this case, I'm going to use the bullet texture. And when we open it up, we get a similar effect to our original bump map. If I back out of it here on my teapot, there we go, it finally did this. And this really truly happens to show you all this great detail when we've got a light in our scene. So I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to actually get my go to parent button back out one more time where I can adjust the amount of my bump. And we're going to bump it up quite a bit. And it gives us quite a bit more detail than the original bump does as far as light and shadow is concerned. Real quick, I'm going to throw just a standard light in our scene so that we can get a good idea on what this normals map does for us that a traditional bump map doesn't do anywhere near as well. Pull this down here. And if you watch my perspective viewport down here, the bottom right corner, as I move this light source, you'll notice that before where there was light on one side and shadow on the other, as the light moves, so does the shadows, and so do the highlights. And that's what makes normals bump mapping so much more incredible and a little bit more useful than just traditional bump mapping. That being said, if I open up my material back again, inside, I'm going to go ahead and click that None button that now says Normal Bump, where we added that special map there. We've got an additional bump slot. In here, we can use it to add just our regular bump map. And both those simulated or virtual deformations in there can kind of work together to give us a fully detailed and rather bumpy surface in this case, where it works with light just fine, but also gives us a little bit extra oomph as we go through. So that's how bump mapping works. Just once again, it is an illusion. We don't actually change or deform the surface on this at all. There is a map slot that will allow things to calculate, allow our renderer to calculate the surface change that may happen with this bump map. And that would be in our material slot. If I back out to the main idea here, the displacement. I'm going to go ahead, let's get an entirely different texture again and assign that to our teapot. Get rid of that light. Brand new, nice bright gray again here. And let's open up our maps rollout and talk about displacement. Displacement works exactly like our standard bump does. Most of the time displacement maps are a little bit more blurry so that they don't have such a hard edge, as they are going to actually manipulate the contours of a surface for us. It doesn't have quite as many calculations as having to use high poly modeling skills to create, actually get in here and model those bullet hole divots. But we can get something done a little bit more quickly here using a displacement map in here. And if I go ahead and hit that None button, go ahead and hit that bitmap button, we may find a displacement map for our bullet holes that we can utilize as well. Again, grayscale, a little bit different than our bump map because it's going to be a little bit, like I said, a little bit softer edges to some things so that it changes nicely. But lighter colors are going to extrude or pop out, and the darker colors are going to recede or back away from our view. If I go ahead and add that to our teapot, and just to kind of kickstart this thing again here, we'll go up to our Views menu, Show View Materials in Viewport as Realistic with Maps. And if I back this out and we kind of turn our displacement up, so we're not really getting that displacement in the viewport here, but you can see what's happening in our sample window, which is kind of a terribly ugly thing here. Let's leave that at 100, and let's go ahead and render this teapot. And we'll see that the surface of our teapot has indeed changed terribly, right? It's kind of caving in ourselves. It no longer even looks like a teapot. So we're going to use this displacement as a very, very subtle effect. Let's drop that down to maybe a 2 and try that render again. And now we've got some bullet hole effects that on the edges here, where it would have been flat for just a bump, it's now really truly concaving that. Bumping it up slightly more will give you much more of that idea, and a little bit extra, just to kind of keep showing you how that actually is deforming here, the actual mesh. But it's only calculated at render time. That displacement map being white rather than light gray is actually kind of protruding the regular surface out a little bit, so in the future I may change that for this map. Okay, what's our final one that we have to talk about? We have to talk about something else that light does. In the beginning of that written lecture, I told you that an object can do one of two things. It either reflects light, in our case specular and diffuse. It either reflects light or it emits light. And with our textures, we can do something similar for light emission as well. And that's going to be the last thing I want to talk to you guys about, on how we're going to use shaders here. I'm going to assign that another blank texture slot to our teapot. We'll start from fresh here again. And I want to talk to you about the self-illumination color here. And we've got that in our blend basic parameters as well. Our basic parameters for all these things, as well as down here in our maps, we have one for a self-illumination imager map as well. Now, self-illumination has two modes here in our standard textures. We do have a channel button for it, so we can add an image. Anything that is white is going to cast light as far as that grayscale is concerned, and anything that is black is going to not cast light. Anything in the middle, you get a little light or a little more light, right? We've also got the option to just kind of raise the amount that this teapot is casting. Our gray that has shadows on it now becomes kind of an illuminated gray lamp source. We've also got the ability to change it via color. So if we put that little check mark in our color box there, our amount changes to a color swatch, where I can make it so that this gray teapot actually emits, let's say, this nice bright lime green color. In our final renders, it really would emit green light off of a gray surface. So we can get some real fun ideas going on in here, as well as use our texture slot. Now let's say, I think I had an example. Let's get rid of our teapot altogether for this example, and I'm just going to make a box. Draw this little box kind of like it's a wall, and we'll make this wall 50, 50, 50, 50, 50. We'll go length and width only about 10. Just length about 10, the other one 50. There we go. There's our wall. And then we're going to create a texture out of this thing. I'm going to put a diffuse in there just so that we can see where we're supposed to have light. And just like in that document, I believe I have some textures that we can use. You just navigate to them here. Textures, I've got some that are already kind of set up here. Here we go. And we can do things like here we've got kind of a sci-fi door that, let me preview for us. That's got some light sources on it that we would want to kind of glow and look pretty neat. Let's find one that kind of works with our box here a little bit better. Here's a fun one with a kind of computer monitor, whereas we would get the glow off our computer screens and maybe some of these other little light sources down here. So I'll add the full color map here to our texture here and apply that to our box. There's our computer monitor. All the metal bits won't be casting light, but we definitely want some light to kind of shine out from this monitor and some of these light panels underneath it. Our self-illumination map, however, let's go in here and go ahead and select bitmap. Our self-illumination map is going to look a little different. An illumination map, let's preview it here. Again, anywhere that's a lighter shade of white is going to shine brightly. A lighter gray is going to shine a little less brightly, giving us some different tones in our light. And anything that's black is going to not shine light at all, not emit light at all. So we can go ahead and select this illumination map we've got previously made. And something will kind of change here. If I use the color mode and kind of change that back to black, it'll shine out a little bit brighter. Let's take a look at this render here, and that's quite a bit of light. So maybe color mode's not for us. We want to adjust by amount here. 100% will give us kind of a glow in here. That'll work pretty nicely. This works best when we've got light in the scene, or in this case, a low light to no light in our scene. So I'm going to quickly make a little light here and reduce its effectiveness, as well as just create kind of a plane or a planar floor that we can use to kind of help us see this light a little bit better. There, I just changed my settings to help see the light source on this guy quite a bit better. All right. Even better, let's make ourselves a box. Pull these walls in as close as we can to this guy. And we'll give them just kind of a flat gray texture for the fun of it. Even a white. Put our light on the outside there so we can see that the only light casting in this room happens to be coming from our monitors. We can see some of it on the wall here as it renders, but our metal disappears completely in a low light environment, and we're getting some backlash and all this stuff from our green lights all the way around this guy. With this light inside the room, we can kind of adjust how bright that light gets. A real bright light won't give us anything, whereas something that's quite a bit dimmer, we'll start to see kind of a combination of our lights shining, as well as get to see some of that metal and grungy texture that's around our monitor. So there you go. A breakdown on how shaders work for illumination, bump mapping, displacement mapping, opacity mapping, as well as kind of a nice guide for dielectric and conductive material types. Hopefully that makes that lecture a little bit more clear as to how we're going to use it inside our software package 3D Studio Max.